One of the most commonly misunderstood aspects of the Culling game is that the merger creature was Kenjaku's end goal. The intent of my Magnum Opus series is to dissect Kenjaku's 1000-year gambits with the Culling game, why the merger creature was Kenjaku's secondary objective at best, and the new form of curse energy was Yuji Itadori all along. Before one understands the role of the merger creature, one must first understand Yuji's role as Sukuna's vessel. Kenny told Choso a lie that was meant to deceive Sukuna, as this false information will be relayed to Yuji and by extension Sukuna nesting inside him. But that single web of lies has the community all fucked up to this day. I have already dispelled and disproved some of Kenjaku's lies in the cold open as well as part 1 of this series, for the sake of time as well as your viewing experience. I'll assume you're all caught up and we're on the same page here. Kenny and Sukuna have one of the most interesting dynamics in all of manga. The word for what they are to each other has not been invented yet. If there ever was a word in any language, it was probably buried beneath the salts of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's how devious this relationship is, but we're gonna stress test the English language to unpack their situationship anyway. They had a mutual respect and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Kenny's prerequisites for friendship were you must be his equal and you cannot be boring. Sukuna checked both boxes for Kenjaku's standards for a friend. Kenny relished the present company of an equal. Though Kenjaku has no true equals to this day in skill, cunning, and forbidden knowledge, Sukuna made up for this with his natural aptitude for sorcery. So much so, Sukuna surprised Kenjaku a few times by deviating from Kenny's meticulous calculations. And for Kenny, that made Sukuna all the more interesting. Sukuna's preferences, on the other hand, were much simpler. If something is interesting, he throws it a bone. At first glance, you'd think that outlook on relationships would make their friendship flimsy, like give or take. But for Sukuna, that made Kenjaku invaluable. A guaranteed source of entertainment in a world where those of the ilk grew few and far between. In over 1000 years of experience, you can count the fun times Sukuna had that had nothing to do with Kenjaku on one hand. Chronically bored was an understatement for Ryomen Sukuna, though that wound was 100% self-inflicted. See, whenever Sukuna found something interesting, he would immediately proceed and try to kill it. It wasn't until he cut Higuruma down that this lifestyle finally caught up to Sukuna. The king's experience whilst locked up inside Yuji provided him some much needed context behind the warriors that fell by his hand. Against his will, he developed an appreciation for the human experience, an ideology that could compel someone to stand against a calamity against all odds. Sukuna divested himself of his humanity in the pursuit of strength on some Mikala-type timing. He cast away identity, morality, ideology, and anything that would nerf his capabilities as a vessel for violence. Something he took great pride in and based his entire sense of self on. Ryomen Sukuna was the idea of might makes right, taken to its logical extreme. Let Sukuna tell it, he would frame burning everything to cinder as the bare minimum in order to reach his and Satoru Gojo's height. But you have to be out of your mind to take a psychopath as a relevant appeal to authority on human emotions. Sukuna was human, though hard they tried to deny it. Sukuna also says he's never looked to anyone to satisfy him, but we have a mount of evidence he did contrary to his rationalizations. Yorozu's words had been living rent-free in his head since they spoke. Even posthumously, Sukuna played her words over and over in his mind when he was in Satoru Gojo's presence. Contrary to Sukuna's proclamation of love being worthless, he held on to Yorozu's words hoping Satoru would be the one. It's evident Sukuna was either lying to himself or he yearned to be satisfied by another subconsciously. Mind you, this was all before Yuji sent Sukuna into an existential crisis mid-fight. It was way back when Satoru was unsealed that the cracks in Sukuna's mask began to appear. In the end, Sukuna got his wish. Even though Satoru had doubts, he did manage to reach Ryomen Sukuna. After 1000 years, the King of Curses finally found his equal. He had his suspicions since their first encounter in chapter 2. There was some doubts when it looked like Satoru may just be ordinary after all, but there were no doubts in his mind after the king was reduced to the challenger for the first time. From the moment the bell rang, the King of Curses was stripped of his title of the strongest. The opponent in front of Sukuna demanded he pry the title from his cold, dead hands. The Sukuna who had existed up until that point was not good enough to beat Satoru Gojo. He was forced to scrape the bottom of the barrel, get it out the mud, and evolve into a version of himself that could reach Satoru Gojo, metaphorically in the camaraderie, and literally through Satoru's infinity. Many a sorcerer challenged the king and were forced to evolve or die. His whole life, Ryomen Sukuna played the role of the selection force, until he faced Satoru Gojo and the roles were reversed. It was Sukuna that had to evolve or die, and fucking fast. This reality brought the King of Curses to ecstasy. For the first time in his life, the king wasn't lonely anymore. In the heat of battle, Sukuna got to savor his high for a few minutes, but he didn't get time to process the can of worms Satoru had just opened in his mind. The moment Satoru cleared his sky, Sukuna's ideology became unsustainable. It wasn't until Sukuna cut Higuruma down that he realized what he had just done. By some miracle, immediately after the Battle of the Strongest, Sukuna encounters another prodigy that rivals himself and Satoru Gojo. A diamond in the rough that one day would surely grow enough to encroach upon his life also. Before he fought Satoru, he wouldn't have thought anything of it. But now for the first time, the king felt unpleasant from snuffing out a bright young talent. He caught himself being disappointed in a reality where Higuruma doesn't get to grow to his full potential, and possibly satisfy him like Satoru just did one day. Yuji being the lens that infected him with this new perspective, sent him into a full-on identity bordering existential crisis, revealing what we thought of as Sukuna's overwhelming sense of self to be nothing more than a curse he placed on himself. It's ironic how Sukuna thought ideals are worthless, but the moment his belief system was challenged, he relied on an ideology to rationalize and reason his way out of it, in resistance to this subtle change or internal shift. The ideology being, love is worthless, I've never needed anybody for anything. Also, I feel like this is Yuji's fault somehow. Mahito said it best, Sukuna was lying to everyone including himself. Just like the Deathpaintings, Sukuna chose to live as a curse, because his physical appearance made living amongst humans as a human unbearable. Like Eso and Ketchizu would have been if they mingled with civilized society. Sukuna was viewed as a cursed little wretch after all. I bring this to you to say Sukuna was not above looking to others to satisfy him. His head was just stuck too deep far up his own ass to see it or admit it. But he didn't have to because Gege performed a masterclass in show and don't tell. This is important to put into context what Kenjaku was to Sukuna. Whereas he found an equal as a living creature in Satoru, Sukuna found a neighbor in brief respite in Kenjaku. In a world that grew increasingly progressive towards ethical hoops, Kenny was the only person who genuinely accepted Sukuna for who he was. Not out of fear, not primordial dick riding. There was no judgment, no expectations. Of all the offerings he could lay at the king's table, Kenny's communion was pure. You would think I mean that metaphorically, but nah bro. The Fujiwara clan hosted annual festivals worshipping this man. Sacrificial offerings to Sukuna was the tax dollar back in those days. One man had the world of Heian in a divine chokehold. Sukuna's reign of terror is only surpassed by real-life Uday Hussein. Kenny, for lack of a better phrase, found Sukuna interesting as a man who revels in chaos. But before Sukuna developed an interest in Kenny's character, selfish as he was, I believe what attracted him to the brain is Kenny was the pinnacle of sorcery and scholarship. Two of Sukuna's greatest assets were obtained just by observing Kenjaku, those being Sukuna's conditional immortality as well as his open domain expansion. It's unclear if Sukuna and Kenny have ever swapped hands before, but I highly doubt it. But what I do think happened was Sukuna witnessed Kenny's open domain at some point. Anything further than that is mere speculation. We are arbitrating today, gang. Not that uncivilized shit Mario and Yuji pulled last month. We are not animals over here. We're moving with grace, professionalism, decorum, and objectivity. Now, for the most important aspects of this relationship, Dhruv's participation in the Culling game was his second incarnation. He was something over 2,000 years old, so Kenny's birth predates even that. Dhruv may be the treasure trove for those interested in Kenjaku's origin. If you take a closer look at Kenjaku's domain expansion, there's a grotesque conglomerate of faces with forehead scars and womb profusion. These suggest each face represents a body Kenny has hopped in, with the oldest vessel sitting at the bottom and the newest stacked at the top. I say the oldest are at the bottom because one of these has a similar appearance to Dhruv. This whole thing is an unholy cultural timeline. Kenny wasn't a nameless fish on Sukuna's chopping board. He was something ancient and immortal, a human who cheats death with a curse. The collective of hundreds of people being all of them but also none of them at the same time. Identity, morality, and ideology are concepts that do not apply to Kenjaku as matter of fact. Sukuna's rejection of the same concepts was superficial at best. Each human death was the seed of life for Kenjaku. Sukuna, on the other hand, sustained himself with the flavor of humans on a superficial level. Kenny consumed their memories, personalities, everything that makes the king's cannibalism look cute. Sukuna's speech suggests he was born into aristocracy, his mother starving to the point he consumed his brother in the womb, paired with the fact that he was dubbed a cursed little wretch in his youth. Strongly suggests his mother fell out with her family and became destitute. This could be for any number of reasons, and this is gay, so I won't even speculate. You know what? I was going somewhere with this, but this isn't a Sukuna vid. I was gonna arrive at Sukuna gained a relatively positive standing with the people at some point. What that title or status was is not relevant to our current discussion. What is relevant is Ryomen Sukuna achieved high status, but fell out with the people and became known as the Fallen. Sukuna wasn't yet the King of Curses in his Heian era lifetime. He earned his status as King of Curses when he traversed the ages after his death as a cursed object. Even Satoru's nuke cannot destroy Sukuna's fingers or mummy. The King of Curses was the mythos born from this achievement, in tandem with the demon of legend Ryomen Sukuna. This defining achievement is also a superficial expression, a pale imitation of Kenjaku's technique, if you will. Not only did Kenjaku embody Sukuna's ideology, he was Sukuna's only superior in sorcery. Each time he watches Kenny cook, Sukuna learns something, a gift that kept on giving. Kenny would have to do some real slimeball backdoor shit for Sukuna to raise his hand against him. Spoiler alert, Kenny did in fact go on to backdoor Sukuna. That's why we're here arbitrating today, separating the weeds from the chaff, sifting truth from deception, because the binding vow preventing him from directly betraying Sukuna may cook Kenny's goose faster than if Sukuna caught on to facts about Yuji Itadori. That's where we'll begin our arbitration. Before we do, if you're entertained thus far, you know the deal. I cook, you do the dishes. Hit the hype button, hit the like button. Before Sukuna died of old age, he and Kenny made a deal. The deal was Kenny turned Sukuna into cursed objects for a second chance at life. In exchange, Sukuna participates in Kenny's Culling game. Kenny gave Sukuna the same PowerPoint presentation he gave Choso for the most part. Sukuna was promised some playtime with the new Tengen, a meal he could slurp up so good he could die. Kenny essentially challenged the king. He said, bro, bet I can create a creature that surpasses you as a vessel for violence. Sukuna, intrigued, said, did this old motherfucker... Oh, that's what we're doing. Bet. Okay, bet. And that's where Kenjaku's lies begin, and we'll proceed to weed them out one by one. On a surface level, Kenny had nothing to gain from this deal. But on the contrary, he gained unadulterated access to Sukuna as a research subject. He could have defiled Sukuna's corpse to get the ingredients he wanted whether or not Sukuna was on board. And that's exactly what he did. He isolated Sukuna's brother's DNA from their Ryomen Sukuna mummy to create Wasuke Itadori, since Wasuke shared the same reproductive system with Sukuna. Against his will, the King of Curses had a biological son, Jin Itadori. The more I expand on this relationship, the further a box I can stuff it into eludes me. I have a feeling it's only gonna get worse from here. I have extensively covered Wasuke, Jin, and cursed corpses extensively in the cold open. If you're new to my channel and hear something crazy and I don't elaborate, then it's something I've substantiated in earlier videos. Also, I gotta be real careful with my words here, because I fear my cold open may have visibility restrictions on it. It was like 2 months ago, I was young, I didn't know Kenny sexually charged crimes would cover a blanket list of YouTube's no-no words. So, hey man, we ain't trying to go backwards. If you're interested in Yuji Itadori's origin, spin the block on that vid. If you're new, in the meantime, you're just gonna have to trust me, bro. Point is, Kenny didn't have to bring Sukuna into the Culling game. This is just about the only instance of ethical hoops we've ever seen from Kenjaku. If Yuji won the Culling game and Sukuna was not a participant, streets wouldn't respect the 83 piece. They would say Yuji dropped 83 against the Wizards. Sukuna accused Satoru of only having feats against the Charlotte Hornets once. Kenny wasn't about to have that level of disrespect on his Magnum Opus. You know what? I take that back. Sukuna had to be a player. Kenny wouldn't be satisfied unless his creation proved strongest there is against strongest there was. So the consensus belief in our community surrounding Yuji is, he was bred to be Sukuna's vessel as a player in the Culling game. And this was possible thanks to being born with a finger implanted in him at birth. I won't even waste your time, bro. That is categorically and unequivocally false. But you don't have to take my word for it anymore. Yuji confirmed after years of experience and studying Tsukumo's notes that his heavenly restriction was the secret to Yuji's capacity as a vessel. Not his lineage, not Sukuna's finger he was born with, none of that. It was Yuji's heavenly restriction. As such, when Yuji turns himself into cursed objects one day, he plans to have only the heavenly restricted consume him. They are the only vessels guaranteed not to break, and the strength of Yuji's soul won't steal their agency or suppress them. Now, our guys who subscribe to the consensus belief didn't just make this up. They received this information from the horse's mouth himself, Ryomen Sukuna. There are 4 pieces of information Sukuna imparted to us here. Here's Sukuna's perspective real quick. Number 1. Yuji's ability to suppress him was due to being born with a finger implanted inside him. This is untrue. Number 2. Kenjaku had a kid with Sukuna's twin. It's funny if you think about it, but Sukuna deadass believed Yuji was his biological son to his dying breath. Funny, but also untrue. Number 3. Yuji was born with a finger implanted inside him. This part is true. And the only reason I can stand on it and tell you it is true is because we saw it with our own eyes. Number 4. Yuji being a cage was necessary to hold a soul like Sukuna's and not break. Megumi was living proof this was also untrue. If my math is correct, Sukuna with his word salad shot 25% from the field. Now, if you still take Sukuna at his word on this topic in the big 26, then I don't know what to tell you, bro. Shueisha could have easily edited this piece of misinformation from Sukuna if it was a misprint. Gege made it pretty fucking clear Sukuna didn't know what was going on. The King of Curses was another hamster in Kenjaku's wheel. If you're still asking a blind man for directions in the big 26 and think you won't Stevie Wonder, I don't know gang, that's tough. That is tough. We're gonna break down each of the 16 fingers Yuji consumed next, and give further context relating to our topic of conversation. The finger implanted inside Yuji at birth served 2 purposes. The first is that particular finger marked Yuji as a Culling game player, serving as a misdirection for Sukuna. The second was to provide Yuji and only Yuji with the cursed energy it contained. It's funny how this one finger is often used as premise for the exact argument it works against. Walk with me real quick. In chapter 1 of JJK, a Sukuna finger was placed in Yuji's high school. Cursed objects are sometimes used as talismans to ward off curses. But this particular finger didn't ward off a damn thing. On the contrary, it attracted curses to Yuji's school because the seal on it had weakened. Seals degrade over time, but the finger was recently placed, so the seal had to have weakened by the time it was planted. Either someone from HQ had a generational moment of incompetence, or a malicious agency was at play. Mind you, the finger was planted when Satoru just happened to be out of town on business. Given the fact that Kenjaku was running the Kamo clan from the shadows the entire time, I'm inclined to go with the latter. The finger lured Yuji as Sukuna sensed a soul that could suppress him. Yuji chose to eat Sukuna's finger, but Sukuna chose Yuji as his vessel just like he did Megumi. It was important for Kenny that Sukuna think he ended up in a cage as a result of his own choices, not because Kenny put him there. In essence, Sukuna believed he ended up in Yuji because he made a bad bet. He thought he found himself the perfect vessel, turned out to be a cage. A mistake he took notes to avoid the next time. We'll talk about Megumi's role in the Culling game in the final minutes. I've extensively documented how Yuji's physiology works in The Secret of the Zane Family Curse. As of Modulo's final chapter, it's not a theory anymore, it's fact. Modulo's Yuji has 20 fingers worth of curse energy, not counting the amount he obtained from his brothers. All Yuji ever needed to consume was that one finger in chapter 1 to obtain Sukuna's complete physiology. So there's no confusion, I'll narrate to give context to all 16 fingers Yuji consumed. Expanding on that first finger, like Mahoraga's Dharma chakra, eating more fingers only sped up the process, but it was gonna happen to completion without consuming the other 19 anyway. Think of it like Yuji's body was in the process of rewriting its physical information to match Sukuna's soul information. Yuji's heavenly restriction is the Uno reverse card for incarnation. Because Yuji was the dominant soul, he suspended Sukuna's incarnation indefinitely. Yuji-kuna's body was stable, whereas Meguna's was unstable. This was intentional on Sukuna's part. He halted his full incarnation to save his Senzubin for Satoru Gojo. In the meantime, he just had fun with it. He exploited the subsequent instability of Megumi's body to morph into what I can only describe as strange shapes and comical proportions. In contrast, Sukuna couldn't even smell the incarnate button when he assumed control of Yuji. There was absolutely nothing Sukuna's soul could do to gain admin rights over Yuji's body. This was a biological rejection. Sukuna's fingers were a curse inside a body resistant to curses. You know when you have a crazy dream that demands your immediate physical reaction but you've got like wet noodle arms? Or you cannot run and about to get eaten cause your dumbass slipped with your legs folded. That's how it's gotta feel going innate band for band, soul for soul with Yuji. Absolutely terrible experience. If you're a curse, would not recommend. Now, if Yuji consumed Sukuna's soul and suspended the king's incarnation indefinitely, then how did his body maintain its stability? His body hosted a foreign soul. Simply put, the shape of his body should have been affected too. Remember now, Kenny was a scholar, and the first law of thermodynamics states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another, in exchange for halting the process of incarnation over the souls he ingests. Yuji's body concedes its physiology or shape to compensate for inhabiting said soul. Unlike regular humans, Yuji's heavenly restriction makes his body the Uno reverse for incarnation. He will suppress you whilst becoming you. Think of it like the glove permanently stretches to fit the hand. Yuji is the pinnacle of human evolution and adaptability. Gege likes comparing the Zane curse to Mahoraga, and I see the vision. Sukuna's been through it, man. I am not gonna hold you. Funny thing is, both Satoru and Kenny kept Yuji's physiology a secret for the same reason. Bro, I just had a gross thought in my head, just ew. Monetization will be a myth as long as I gotta talk about the Kenjaku files. Some of my guys are upset Yuji didn't get to know his father, but best believe Yuji found out all about Kenny and Tengen in certain emails in the big 2026. Anyway man, with one finger Yuji would have eventually grown into his full 20-finger curse energy billionaire status regardless. The first was the most important finger, as we'll go over shortly. The other 15 were served to Yuji strategically for one reason or the other. Finger number 2 was served to Yuji by Satoru to confirm he could suppress Sukuna. Finger number 3 is where Kenny got really brazen with it. He sent Megumi, a novice Yuji, and Nobara to take on a special grade Fingerbearer. We'll spin back on this shortly. Finger number 4 was another special finger like the 16th. Wait, before I get on with it, it's important to know that by finger number 3, Satoru's 6 eyes could see Shrine was almost all the way engraved already, to the point it could confirm it's only a matter of time until his awakening. I feel like those are the moments Streets should have realized something was up. Some used to fight me on this, but if 3 pieces of Sukuna's soul were enough to obtain Shrine's complete kit, then why would Yuji need all 20 pieces to obtain Sukuna's cursed energy? Anyway man, like we were saying, number 4 was another special finger. Kenny had Mahito imbue a trace amount of his cursed energy and planted it at Junpei's house. This finger was a honeypot for Jujutsu High. Mahito's cursed energy would lead them to the right room in the Tomb of the Star, where the most dangerous cursed objects are kept. Kenny instructed Mahito to steal all Sukuna's fingers in Tengen's possession, but he specifically instructed Mahito to take only Deathpaintings 1 to 3. Again, keep this in mind for later. Yuji didn't eat number 4 until it made its way back as a 10-for-1 special in Shibuya. The chronological 5th finger was more Megumi bait. Bro, I could have saved us both so much time if I just opened with Megumi, because this is ridiculous. I swear, most of early JJK feels like a slow burn of watching Kenny curse Megumi. Research for this video was so draining. Bro, I had to stop reading, go for a walk, just touch some grass, look up at the sun, and think to myself, man, what am I doing with my life? Like, what's my purpose in life? Is it to watch my favorite character get slimed out by curses, then get on camera and do a play-by-play on how they did my boy, how they massacred my boy? Y'all almost lost me to the game over this, man. This Megumi shit gets serious. So, Kenny served the 6th finger through Geto's daughters. Kenny is eyes and levels of diabolical at this point. He told the girls he'd vacate Geto's body if they slaughtered non-sorcerers in Shibuya. He betrayed them whilst they had 2 Sukuna fingers in their possession. This gave the girls the impression they had all the leverage. With Plan A off the table and Satoru not being an option, they would try to wipe Kenny off the field the only way they could. Kenny betrayed those kids knowing they would try to use the fingers against him in retaliation. Only that would lead them straight into the jaws of Satan himself, whilst also giving Kenny exactly what he wants. Notice how he was not pressed to take back possession of the finger Nanako hid as leverage. That's how little Sukuna's fingers mattered at this point for Project Yuji Itadori. He entered the Shibuya incident with only 4 fingers. By the end, Yuji was fed 11 more, bringing Sukuna to a total of 15 pieces of his soul. The 16th finger is where it gets devious. This finger was inside Yuji all along, but it was only roused when Kenny untied the knot. But unlike the other players, the cursed object sealed in Yuji had a special condition on it. It would unseal only when Sukuna vacates Yuji's body. Another common misconception is that Sukuna took the 16th piece of his soul with them to Megumi. There's a laundry list of problems with this. First off, Sukuna was shocked Yuji had a finger he didn't know about. They shared a body, and Sukuna didn't notice a piece of his soul in there the entire time. In the first volume of JJK, we were told some fingers are quiet while some have an immense presence. But when Sukuna incarnated back in chapter 1, all the fingers resonated and released their cursed energy all at once. All except Yuji's dormant finger, of course. At the time, that particular finger was suppressed behind a seal. Sukuna's vessel acts like a radar of sorts, and that was Yuji's job at first, leading the sorcerers to the rest of Sukuna's fingers. So by all accounts, Sukuna should have sensed his 16th finger inside Yuji, at least from the moment Kenny untied the knot. It's also important to note Kenny freed a few curses from his cursed spirit manipulation. He fed these cursed spirits Sukuna's fingers in anticipation for his incarnation in chapter 1. These curses went on to become known as the Fingerbearers. But before they did, like Kuro Urushi, they lay dormant in strategically placed spots like the detention center. Kenny even used a Fingerbearer in Yasuhachi Bridge to cover up the nature of Tsumiki's curse. The Fingerbearer that lured Tsumiki pretty much took the fall, but in reality it was Kenny's objects that cursed Tsumiki. Yuji became a Fingerbearer spontaneously, similar to Kenny's cursed spirits. The objects sealed in Fingerbearers did not release their cursed energy until a particular condition was fulfilled. Whereas for the cursed spirits, it was Sukuna's incarnation. For Yuji, it was Sukuna vacating his body. If that finger had assimilated with Yuji at any point while Sukuna nested inside him, Sukuna would have just taken it with when he vacated Yuji's body. Even though Sukuna's role as Yuji's biological flavoring ended in Chapter 1, the Culling game had already begun since the remote idol transfiguration. Kenny needed Yuji to clear the barrier of entry for survival in the Culling game, and fast, with even one finger's worth of juice reinforcing heavenly restricted bone. Combined with his brother's RCT-efficient physiology, Yuji could heal endlessly whilst being damn difficult to injure. The finger was basically an anti-Sukuna countermeasure. The time to wait for Yuji to completely process Sukuna's physiology was simply not there. He'd need to spend a year in Africa bare minimum for that. Besides, the more black flashes he lands, the more his cursed energy swells up. He was designed to pop them shits at will, by the way, so Kenny was confident in his horse in the race. Which brings us to the main part of our discussion. How do I discuss Choso's part in all this without going on a 40-minute tangent about the merger first? Well, I can't. But what I can do is briefly touch on the details relevant to our arbitration. We'll do a full analysis of Choso and Kenny's final interaction in Part 3, as it mostly relates to Culling and the cycle of curses. For now, we'll limit ourselves to the two primary roles Choso played for Kenny, as it relates to our topic of Sukuna's vessel. Kenny breaks into the Tomb of the Star. Not 2 words into his entrance and this man is already lying. No, seriously, the first thing to fly out of his mouth is a fucking lie. Bro, if the first thing to come out of your mouth is a lie, everything else that follows is impeachable. Kenny claimed Choso was no longer useful but proceeded to use Choso as a messenger for more misinformation and to deliver their brothers to Yuji. Literally everything that happened in Choso's life, including his death, was orchestrated by Kenny. He left the Deathpaintings alone for over 100 years, then suddenly incarnated only the 3 special grades. Kenny prepared a Fingerbearer to strengthen Megumi as a vessel. To make sure Megumi would be the one to take on the Fingerbearer, he sent the 2 expendables to divert Yuji and Nobara. There was nothing organic about the conclusion of those events. 3 high school students faced off against 3 special grades. Given Yuji's resistance to poison alongside immunity to his brother's blood, taking on one of the Deathpaintings was a tactical necessity. Nobara didn't stand a chance against a Fingerbearer, so Megumi had little choice in the matter. At this point, Yuji had reservations about taking human lives. Eso and Ketsu's appearance in Culling cursed energy would also increase the likelihood of Yuji taking both of their lives. Kenny set up Yuji to murder his brothers unknowingly to put Yuji in Choso's crosshairs. Kenny then sent Choso to set off the bomb in Shibuya, Ryomen Sukuna, knowing Choso's link to his brothers would reveal Yuji's relationship with him. Even Choso's defection was curated by Kenny. Think about this, right? After Kenny subjugated Tengen, it would be impossible for regular people to find certain rooms in the Tomb of the Star. When Mahito broke into Tengen's warehouse, he was instructed to leave the rest of the Deathpaintings, making Choso the only one who could access his brothers, and Yuji the only one Choso can accept consuming them. So Choso being no longer useful to Kenny was definitely a lie. Choso being no longer interesting may have been the more egregious lie though. Kenny constantly gaslit Choso through this entire fight so he can turn up. Our boy was thrown off center by Kenny's trolling. Choso didn't even process that this guy said I was not interesting just 5 minutes ago. And now he's saying he had high expectations and is disappointed I only pushed him this far. Meanwhile, Kenny's having a ball, finally giving his 150+ year project a test run. In the end, Choso exceeded Kenny's expectations. Kenny was so impressed with Choso that his supernova inspired Kenny's mini Uzumaki. After making fun of Choso for a cheap copy of Winking, Kenny goes on to copy a Choso original and add it to his arsenal. This was beautiful and twisted at the same time, because the same mini Uzumaki dealt a fatal injury to Yuki Tsukumo. If you're smelling what I'm cooking so far, you cannot take anything Kenny said in this interaction at face value. It's only through cross-examination that we can appreciate what is truth and what is not. Kenny tells a lot of lies in this interaction, but this is the one we'll debunk last. We'll cover the rest in part 3. This one's interesting because it's more like a lie of omission. No, that's not the right way to put it. Kenny was telling the truth when he said the customary prelude to the merger was complete. Cursed energy released by players was only a diversion, a bluff or plan B to be exact. Kenny lured the U.S military to the Culling game and used their deaths to fuel the ritual with the cursed energy it required. He could have started the merger at any time he wanted from the moment he subjugated Tengen. But does that mean the Culling game had already fulfilled its purpose? No. First off, the only person who can define its purpose is the man who intended it. Secondly, if the merger creature was the Culling game's primary objective, Kenny would have gotten on with it immediately. Think about this, if Kenny could have started the merger the instant he obtained Tengen, then why wait? Even Ryomen didn't buy into the bullshit. Kenny was stalling. When Satoru was broken out of prison realm, you'd think Kenny would display more urgency. Instead, he enlists a binding vow with Sukuna as insurance, in case anything happens and he's no longer around to complete the ritual. Like, bro, why do you need insurance if you can just do it right now without lifting a finger? It's apparent Kenny was waiting for a green light that had nothing to do with the ritual itself. Therein lies the true purpose of the Culling game. Reiji was right for the most part, but we gotta factor in that he didn't account for all the variables. Reiji didn't know about Yuji Itadori, but we do. Kenjaku did drop a bomb when the game reached a stalemate that would complete the prelude customary ritual. With the information presented to Reiji, it was only logical the Culling game would fulfill its purpose once Kenny obtained authority to begin the merger. The fact that Kenny sat on the merger button for over 2 months implies the Culling game had not yet fulfilled its purpose. At least not the purpose the man himself defined. One worth the risk of being decapitated by Satoru or Yuta, getting snuck by Maki or vaporized by Sukuna at the first sight of treachery. Remember the children's story about the turtle and rabbits in a race. Put simply, if his goal was the merger creature, then Kenny is the rabbit in this case. Which I just don't think was the case. Kenny's objective was to prove what he thinks is interesting was really interesting. That was the purpose of the Culling game. This idea is perfectly encapsulated by Kenjaku's and Sukuna's interests being diametrically opposed. Kenny's interest in Yuji has been illustrated in every way but verbally. Sukuna, on the other hand, didn't find a single interesting bone on Yuji's body. And won't you look at that, Kenny has been instigating a fight to the death between Yuji and Sukuna since chapter 1. Almost as if he wanted to prove something he thinks is interesting was actually interesting to Sukuna. The Culling game was a human kodoku ritual, a fitting stage for a fight to the death between the King of Curses and the pinnacle of human potential. So if Yuji being Sukuna's vessel was just a ruse, what's all this about then? See, Kenjaku had a problem. Satoru wasn't the only obstacle for Kenny's Culling game. Ryomen Sukuna was also a wild card. Mahito was essential to the Culling game and he barely made it out of meeting Sukuna alive. Kenny planned to have Jogo in his arsenal too, but Sukuna got to him first. Though he was on Kenny's side, the king was a liability. To make the Culling game happen, Kenny tap danced around giants for real. Yuji kept Sukuna out of Kenny's way. But more importantly, Sukuna was biological seasoning for Yuji. 2 birds, 1 stone. Another scene that exposes Sukuna's vessel was just a ruse. Kenny converses with Yuji for the first time and he only refers to him as Sukuna's vessel, not by name, further suggesting to Sukuna that the brat was only just that. In the event he finds out Yuji is their descendant. Kenny went on to contradict himself in the same interaction by saying he's expecting great things from Yuji. Now 1 week later, he tells Choso their old disappointments and Yuji was to become a vessel, but that is done now. If Yuji'd fulfilled his role, then what great things did Kenny expect? You feel what I'm saying? Fact of the matter is, though Kenny won and proved that what he thought is interesting was actually interesting, if you ask Sukuna for his contributions directly, the answer may have been a violent no. To tie all this up neatly, Kenny sent Choso to set off the bomb in Shibuya when they needed the most chaos. But Sukuna's demonics that day served a deeper purpose. What Kenny was really counting on was Sukuna giving Yuji a feel for his dormant arsenal. It's so funny how Kenny played Sukuna at every turn and made him think it was his own idea every time. The king was so enthusiastic about it, he shared his memories of the Shibuya incident with Yuji. Little did he know he had just handed over the instruction manual to all his techniques to an enemy with the same arsenal lying dormant, engraving on the enemy's mind 1,000 years worth of skill as deep as the trauma it came with. Every time Yuji felt like puking from Sukuna's massacre, he'd recall the feeling of molding divine flame with his own hands. The complex binding valves for his thermobaric explosions and cutting down thousands of people to heat his furnace. With the close of the Shibuya incident, Sukuna had fulfilled his role as Yuji's inmate. Yuji was never chosen to be Sukuna's vessel. Sukuna was chosen to be Yuji's biological seasoning. As such, Yuji's role as Sukuna's vessel was never meant to extend to the Culling game. Ritual aside, the Culling game was a battlefield tailored for the king versus Kenny's new form of cursed energy. For that to happen, Sukuna would need his own agency, which just wasn't gonna happen in Yuji's body. Just the idea of Sukuna having prolonged possession of Yuji's body is absurd. Even if that wasn't the case, off of principle alone, the king would never accept the situation. Sukuna didn't reject his fate of a conjoined twin only to be reduced to the submissive soul in another cohabitation predicament. Even if Sukuna didn't figure out his body hopping trick, Kenny had to break him out of Yuji eventually. This was the plan all along. Kenny handpicked Megumi to be Sukuna's vessel from the start. Being the head of the Kamo clan, Kenny had information about Mahoraga. He also kept track of every 6 eyes for centuries, so he knew about Mahoraga killing a limitless user once. The concept was simple. Armed with something like the Yamato no Orochi, Kenny was confident Sukuna would find a way to overcome the infinity. Kenny's only surprise was Sukuna figured out body hopping on his own. Megumi often gets flack for how he handled Reiji, but they could have become allies and Megumi's fate would not have changed one bit. Just like Yuji, Megumi's fate was orchestrated by Kenny. The finger sealed inside Yuji is proof of this. The same finger that marked Yuji as a player fulfilled its purpose, when and only when it was out of Sukuna's reach. Yuji was never meant to participate alongside Sukuna. The Culling game was the ultimate function. A fight to the death between the pinnacle of each possibility of cursed energy in the form of humans. Cursed spirits, sorcerers, non-sorcerers, and Kenny's new form of cursed energy, what we now call the Kalyan. Kenny brought Tsumiki into the Culling game as Megumi bait. The designated location Megumi was transported to, like all the other players, was one that would force a second awakening in him. That is to say, Megumi would be pushed to the brink. Kenny used the same playbook on Megumi that he did Satoru. He exhausted Megumi physically and mentally. He sent Yorozu straight to Megumi to break his soul, and gave Sukuna the window to stage his breakout from Yuji. When a player enters a colony, they are randomly transported to 9 designated locations. But when Tsumiki entered the colony, she was transported straight to Megumi. Our boy Yuji wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but even he picked up something wasn't right. Yorozu knew exactly what she was doing too, because before she flew away, she told Sukuna she would be waiting. Even the angel couldn't tell the fallen nested inside Yuji. Though Yorozu had her own agency, Kenny was shown to predict her movements to surgical precision. I find it interesting that Kenny chose a Fujiwara sister as Yorozu's vessel. Tsumiki wasn't a Fujiwara by blood, and that's kind of the point. Neither was Yorozu. She was taken in by the Fujiwara clan. You could argue Mai was a more suitable vessel for Yorozu, but Kenny took the risk of Tsumiki instead. Megumi is a sorcerer. If Kenny didn't drag Tsumiki into this, Megumi would have ended up on the front lines regardless. Megumi wasn't just anybody either. He was Satoru Gojo's little brother. Kenny took a big risk involving Tsumiki and Megumi in his shenanigans. Risk he would not take for no reason. I hope in this short time I've effectively glazed the depth of Gege's pen. There's nothing nebulous about Kenny's plan, to be honest. We just haven't been looking in the right places. There were some plot lines left unresolved, sure, but for the most part, JJK was a complete experience. If you're sick of JJK slop and want steak every day but Sunday, hit the noti bell. Catch me on the next one, gang.